Have you ever noticed how the sharpest person in the room usually doesn't make a scene? No dramatic goodbye, no big speech, no slam door. They just get harder to reach. One skipped dinner, one late reply, one polite no, then another. And one day, everybody's staring at the empty chair like, wait, where did they go? Most people read that the wrong way. They call it pride, coldness, some weird little power move, like the person wants to feel above everyone else. Cute theory, wrong theory. The real reason is usually stranger. A lot of the time, smart people back away because they start seeing what everybody else walks right past. The tone that shifts halfway through a sentence, the favor wearing a fake smile, the applause that sounds warm in public and hollow the second the room empties out. Once you notice enough of those little tells, social life stops looking random. It starts looking designed. That's what this video is about. The hidden psychology behind why the most perceptive minds slowly step out of social noise. Not because they stopped caring, not because they think they're better than everyone, because something in them changed, and the real reason for that change is the part almost nobody wants to say out loud. At first, nothing looks off. You reply to messages, you show up, you take people at face value. That's one of the most generous habits a person can have. It's also one of the easiest to exploit. Then the shift starts. Quietly, almost annoyingly slowly. You catch the tiny contradictions. Somebody smiles while landing a jab. Someone offers help, but only after they've already made things worse. A friend celebrates you when there's an audience, then goes cold the second the crowd leaves. Another person keeps circling your life, but never from simple interest. There's always a request tucked inside the conversation somewhere. None of that is dramatic on its own. That's exactly why it matters. Intelligence isn't just solving obvious problems. In social life, it often means spotting the seams, the places where the behavior doesn't match the story. And once you see the seam, you can't unsee it. And then the room changes shape. Not because everybody suddenly turns evil. Please. It's because your mind stops filing their behavior under random stuff and starts connecting the dots. A phrase here, a pause there, a sudden burst of sweetness that only shows up when something is needed. You realize some interactions were never about connection. They were about timing, leverage, and convenience. That's the first crack in the spell. And once the spell breaks, what you feel usually isn't superiority. It's fatigue. Because seeing clearly is expensive. Nobody puts that on the brochure. What looks like confidence from the outside can feel like a full-time job on the inside. You walk into a room, and you're not just hearing words. You're tracking pace, tension, who's performing for who's dodging eye contact, who wants the spotlight, who feels threatened by it. You're reading the space between sentences. You're comparing what people say with what they're carefully not saying. Most people do some of this, but the more self-aware you are, the more of it you do all the time. And yes, that has a cost. Social interaction is not just being around people. It demands attention, self-control, memory, emotional regulation, quick interpretation. The more layers you notice, the more work your brain does in the background. That doesn't always show up as panic. Sometimes it shows up as a slow drain that never quite leaves. A dinner that used to feel easy now feels like a shift. A group chat that once felt alive now feels like a list of obligations. A room full of people doesn't feel loud out there. It feels loud in your head. And that's where a lot of intelligent people start stepping back. Not because they hate people, because their nervous system starts sending a pretty simple message. This place takes more than it gives. I call that the friction toll. The hidden price of staying alert in spaces that never really settle your mind. Nobody warns you about it, because most people are too busy enjoying the surface to notice the drain underneath. And once you start noticing that drain in real time, another question shows up. And this one changes everything. If so much of what you're hearing is filtered through other people's inner mess, how much of it is actually about you? Carl Jung had a sharp point that still hits because it explains so much ordinary conflict. Until a person gets honest about their own inner life, they tend to mistake private turmoil for the world itself. They think they're reacting to reality. Half the time, they're reacting to a projection. That's the hard part. People do not always meet you as you are. A lot of the time, they meet you as a screen for whatever they're carrying. Someone criticizes you, and the force of it makes no sense for the moment. Maybe they aren't reacting to your mistake. Maybe your confidence kicked something loose in them. Someone keeps cutting you off, and it may not be some elegant hunger for control. It may be a fear of silence because silence leaves them alone with their own thoughts. Someone leans on you for attention, reassurance, emotional labor, and the bond may be less about affection than escape. Once you see that, a lot of personal pain loosens its grip. You stop assuming every sharp edge is a verdict on your worth. You stop treating every cold response like proof you failed. You stop acting like you're the author of every reaction in the room. That doesn't make you detached. It makes you harder to manipulate through guilt and confusion. Emotional intelligence at this level is not about being endlessly nice to everyone. It's about knowing where another person ends and where you begin. And that boundary is exactly where smart people start separating themselves from the endless churn of social performance. They don't lose empathy. They lose the habit of handing their inner life to anybody who hasn't earned it. Small shift? Sure. But small shifts can change your whole life. Watch what happens next. People always misunderstand solitude. They hear the word and picture loneliness, rejection, some dramatic exit from life. But for a lot of deeply reflective people, silence doesn't feel like absence. It feels like the first place their own mind can finally speak without being interrupted every 10 seconds. That's why being alone can feel weirdly comforting. No need to translate yourself for an audience. No need to keep wearing the version of you everybody else expects. No need to answer a stream of demands that were never really about closeness in the first place. In quiet, the noise drops, and what's left is usually more honest than any crowded room. You hear your own judgments more clearly. You notice what you actually believe instead of what you inherited from the people around you. You start to see which parts of your life are chosen and which parts are just habit with better branding. That's one reason deliberate solitude tends to support reflection and emotional balance. When the outside noise calms down, the inside can finally organize itself. You start to see not just what you feel, but why you feel it. And here's the twist people miss. The person who wants less social input is not always getting colder. A lot of the time, they're getting more whole. They're no longer starving for constant confirmation. They're no longer trying to borrow stability from everybody else. They're building a self that doesn't fall apart when the room goes quiet. That's where outsiders get it wrong. They think the person has turned isolated. In reality, the person has just stopped confusing noise with meaning. And once that clicks, the next move is almost automatic. They choose more carefully. And from the outside, that choice looks like disappearance. It can look sudden. One day they're everywhere. Then they're not. But the change was usually happening in pieces long before anybody noticed. They stopped answering immediately because not every message deserves instant access. They stopped showing up to every event because not every invitation is real welcome. They stopped arguing with people who were committed to misunderstanding them. They stopped being the emotional center of rooms that only remembered them when they needed something. That's the part people hate admitting. The quiet person is not always backing away from people. Sometimes they're backing away from a role. The role of the dependable one. The role of the fixer. The role of the listener who absorbs everything and gets nothing back. The role of the person keeping a fragile social machine from collapsing at their own expense. And once they see that pattern, they can't unsee the trade. Every yes to something draining is a no to their own stability. Every hour spent performing availability is an hour not spent building a life with fewer leaks. So they get selective, then guarded, then deliberately hard to reach. Not because they're bitter, because they're awake. They start protecting attention, protecting pace, protecting peace. They spend more time reading, thinking, walking, sitting with their own thoughts, and less time chasing approval from people who never planned to understand them anyway. To outsiders, that can look like withdrawal. From the inside, it feels like relief. And that relief is the bridge to the real ending. Because what looks like the end of social life is often the beginning of something much more deliberate. Here's the part nobody says plainly. Intelligent people do not vanish because they want to win some contest about distance. They vanish because they finally clock the price of staying everywhere for everyone. They realize their energy is not unlimited. Their attention is not public property. Their emotional presence is not a free sample for anyone who reaches for it. That realization rewires everything. They stop chasing rooms that require them to shrink. They stop defending themselves to people who only listen for weak spots. They stop confusing being needed with being loved. And yes, from the outside, that can look like disappearance. But it's not a loss of interest in people. It's precision. It's the moment somebody decides a meaningful life is not built from constant access, constant noise, and constant explanation. It's built from restraint, from discernment, from the nerve to leave a table when the meal is eating you alive. So if someone around you has gotten quieter, slower to reply, or harder to drag back into old patterns, ask a better question. Don't ask why they're becoming distant. Ask what they finally understood. Because more often than not, the answer is simple. They saw the difference between connection and consumption, and they stopped pretending those two things were the same. If that hit something in you, subscribe for the next one, and in the comments, drop the section number that hit hardest. I want to know which part stayed in your head after the video ended. Thanks for sticking around. See you in the next one.